Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
Well, here we are, everybody, and welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. I'm excited. We're live streaming today across YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And what that means is you're peeking into a live taping of an interview for a future Quiet Warrior International podcast, as well as a brand new YouTube premiere that will come out the same week. So without ado, and I'm just going to introduce our guest to you, I'm excited to have on with me Ebba Karlsson. Ebba, I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you and how we met, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. Everyone, okay. Ebba is a life coach, an author, a champion ballroom dancer. She's also a model turned sexual assault victim who just co-founded a new organization dedicated to cleaning up the modeling industry amidst the Me Too era. Wow. And in fact, there's a website I'm going to mention, everybody. It's called victoriousangels.com. I checked it out and it sent me on a journey. We have another connection. We share a relationship through a New York publisher. So we're going to give a shout out to Morgan James, who is honoring Ebba's story, and her book's just come out. We'll talk a lot about that. So Ebba, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome to my show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to get to know you better as well.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Absolutely. Now, we were talking offline. So as I told you, we're just going to have a conversation like we're in my living room. Well, actually, we are, because I'm recording from my home studio. And I sat here today and I literally went on a journey emotionally through so many things, goods and challenges, because I read your book from cover to cover. And so we'll get into that, but let's take it right back. Go back to the beginning. Sometimes people start at their childhood when they're born, but take us into the story, how your life began and how you ended up, doing what you do today.
Yeah. So I grew up, in a not a musical family. My dad was a famous sound engineer in Sweden, and I got to live next to the music. His studio was also at home. It was, I had my bedroom next to his studio, so I got to see and meet all these amazing musicians and be part of late nights and hanging with him and sleeping on somebody's couch. And it was a very, very interesting life and very enriching. At the same time, he was exposed to a lot of temptation, a lot of beautiful and amazing people. So my dad is a great man and he's a beautiful person, but he also has a big heart. He likes to please others. So what happened was my parents started to get some problems, and he wasn't the faithful kind. So he started to cheat on my mom, and then she discovered, and she was, of course, devastated and couldn't deal with her own life and her own feelings. So she started drinking, and she didn't take any help or anything. So a lot of her anger and frustration came out on me. And I was the oldest of two kids. So I felt very responsible and had to, take care of my little brother. And so that was very difficult. So my childhood was chaotic in that sense, even though we had a lot of fine moments as well. Like we have a crazy kind of humor. So I think that humor really saved us from surviving.
Well, I want to jump in there, and you're awesome to talk to, because it's like we're just having a cup of coffee. My brain is three-dimensional here. People say I can go from one quadrant to the other. I'm just messed up that way. And I'm listening to you and my brain went this way on a journey. I want to just riff on that, what you said. When I read the book, I went, oh my God. Here's the thing. Like, my father was a military commanding officer, and my mom and dad were married for about 22 years. But my childhood, I remember coming home one day and my mom had a towel wrapped around her head, and I was in my early teens, and she was weeping, and she had the phone around her neck. And I said, what happened? And when she finally told me, she said, some girl called the house and said, Mrs. Dutta, I don't like it when Mr. Dutta comes here to see my mom. And that's how she found out. And so I grew up with a father. My dad, by the way, it was wonderful. He passed away recently, but he was gregarious and he had this sense of humor. There were big parties, drinking parties, and he became a violent alcoholic. But he was a fun guy and he was charismatic. I have a picture of him where my mom said he looked like Elvis when he was back in Fiji in his uniform, and everybody loved the guy. And he was a top party, but something occurred in the relationship where he did those things. So I just want to give it back to you in a minute on this, that when I started reading your book, I got stuck in my childhood, and I went into business and I started chasing success. And I learned in your book some things about that. But what I really had was a hole in my soul. And as a man, I wasn't allowed to talk about my weakness as an executive. But what I really realized is that this whole chapter of my life, I was stuck for over 20 years of my life trying to unravel it. So I'm going to give it back to you now, because your book's amazing, because you've done so many things to even unravel that part of your life. But it set you on a path where you went into sort of a path of, what I'll say in a polite way, because I love your story, and you, is a bit of self-destruction with your own choices. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So first, thank you so much, because my whole intention with my book was to have that effect on people. So I guess I succeeded. It's so good to hear somebody share what they felt when they read the book, that they connected to their own story and their own journey, and how they can, find their inspiration. Yeah. So, I mean, when I was a teenager, that's when I really hit the bottom, and I really didn't want to live. I wanted to commit suicide. So I thought about it. And then one night I stood by the window in my kitchen where I grew up, and I had this knife, and I wanted to cut myself, because I really wanted to revenge. I really wanted them to feel the pain I felt inside. And I couldn't find another way than to express my pain through, besides cutting myself. Like, that was the only thing I could think of. And as I stood there, I kind of connected to the stars outside. I looked at, it was winter, it was dark. You could see the stars, and they were popping out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. And how can I kill myself or hurt myself when I love life so much? And when I understood that, that's when it shifted and changed. Like, I had hit the bottom as a young person, and I allowed that to then take me forward into my life and to become a seeker. And that's when I started really seeking, a spiritual meaning of life. So that was the first, I think, in the hero's journey, or the heroine's journey, that was the first obstacle.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you had those thoughts of
I
wanting to
was
end it all?
14 years old.
Yeah.
And then, I started looking for happiness outside of myself. And boys, of course, it was on that list. And then, unfortunately, I was pregnant when I was 15, and that was another really big obstacle that led me into meditation later on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that painful story of your attempt. I got to say, the courage you have to be on national media and talk about that, and even write this book. Everybody, this is a teaching moment, especially for men out there, because we're going to get into some uncomfortable stuff that men don't like to hear about, bad behavior. But this is what it looks like to be vulnerable, to talk about your weaknesses. And when you said that, you became real. I'm a big advocate for mental health. I've spent 10 years at a leadership level with a not-for-profit board. I have struggled with depression, anxiety. I have connections in my family of suicide. And I even grew up, as I said, my dad was a drinker. It appears it was backwards for you, but my mom was the one always on medication and in bed, drugged up. And what I realized, she was just trying to cope with the pain and what my father was projecting on her, which was mental and physical abuse. And so thank you for sharing that. It blows my mind that here you were wanting to take yourself out, and you made the choice to stay the course. I want to say a couple more things on that, and then get back to you into your story with a reference to something I wrote down from your book. One of my mentors, and many people know of the Tony Robbins of the world, he's a speaker and a coach. And I remember talking to him or in one of his programs, and he said, people who want to commit suicide, if they're going to do it. But he said, those who don't, he said, there's some resilience or some reason for living. And it's a heart issue. It's attached to something in their soul. They were put here. And he described it as a crazy eight. He said, most of us who go through this state of trauma on in lives, it's like a crazy, we go round and round, and we make choices, good ones, bad ones, good ones, bad ones. And then some of us go, boop, they go off the eight and they take themselves out. but the ones that stay on, there's something about that. So when I look at your what you said in your book about your father's lifestyle, being in the industry of music, a talented man, and then I won't steal the thunder of the book, but there were some things he did which paralleled the story I just told you about my own dad. And then your mom was talented, but she found, I guess, refuge in maybe alcohol to deal with her pain. Um, you went out from that thing into the modeling industry. So tell us about that, because there's something incredible about that chapter of your story.
Yeah. So, as a seeker, you try to find happiness everywhere. And when you can't find it in one area, you go to the next. So for me, I was lucky, I had beautiful parents, so I came out pretty okay. And, but that to say, I was never a top model. I was actually super shy, and I was very I didn't like to be in to have attention at all. I would actually take long ways around, to avoid seeing people, meeting people, because that's how shy I was. Because when I decided to shut down, that little girl that was happy once, and who suffered, she closed the door kind of. So what happened was, much later in life, when I was 19 years old, I actually was approached by a scout in Stockholm. I lived in Stockholm. I grew up in Stockholm, Sweden. And the scout was somebody who was familiar to my friends, and I hanged out with a lot of, the artists and some models in Stockholm. And this guy came up to me and said, "Hey, you're so beautiful. Don't you want to come to France? And I have this amazing job for you there if you want to come." And I worked, actually. I was full-time employed by a company called The Body Shop, and I had a boyfriend, so I didn't really have any real reasons to go. I was pretty happy, but he convinced me to go, and that's how it happened. He said, "Come to Monaco," and I left to Monaco, and from there on, he didn't have a place for me. He didn't have a job for me, actually. I had to, So the guy that I went to see there said, "The swimsuit costume job is, we don't need you, but you can be my secretary." And I'm like, "That's not going to happen." So So after that incident, I got really suspicious. We didn't have cell phones then, so I couldn't really call anybody. I had to depend on the people who I met. So then he said, "Let's go to Cannes." And Cannes is a city on the Riviera, and we went there. And when I got to Cannes, he said, "We're going to see a friend of mine." And I got to the villa. There was no friend there. And he said, "Well, let's go behind. We could stay at his pool house." But it wasn't a pool house. It was actually a pool shack. And it had dirty mattresses on the floor and some sheets. It was just disgusting. And he said, "We'll just sleep here over the night." But the friends never came. And I was actually raped in that pool shack by him. And for somebody who doesn't understand that, it's very difficult to, people say, "Why didn't you run away? Why didn't you do anything resistance?" I mean, it didn't happen like it was a grooming. He seemed to be interested. He said, "You're beautiful, la, 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 la." And then at the end, he's like trying to, have sex with you. And I said, "Well, I don't want to, and I don't want to." And at the end, he's like forcing himself onto me. And I kind of shut down. I was scared. I didn't know how to kind of get out of the situation. I felt like I needed to play smart. So I said, "Can I call my parents?" So we went down to the village, and I called from a phone booth. In this phone booth, he was outside listening to it. So I couldn't really tell them what was going on, because I also felt ashamed. I was actually 20 years old. So, I wasn't a young child. I thought I could defend myself. And so from that on, I kind of I need to get out of this situation. So I said, where's the job you promised me? So then he said, let's go to Paris. And we went to Paris. And I had a visit at one agency, but they didn't want to. I was pretty short. I'm not very tall to be a model.
Mhm.
I'm just like 5'6", and I was pretty athletic. So at that time they didn't want that. They wanted very thin models. And so he again said, "You can be my secretary," which because I speak French, so it was English. So and that didn't happen. But then I got this casting job for Elite, and Elite is or was, and I don't know if it still is, but one of the best agencies in the world for modeling. And I got a casting there with the owner, Gerald Marie. And I got to come into his office, and he introduced himself and invited me into his office. And the first thing he did was to shut the blinds. And it was so awkward because it was in the middle of the day. And people were like, the bookers were outside. And I'm like, why is this happening?
Yeah.
So, and then he started kind of grooming me and telling me that these are the models that you can be like, and since you speak French, you can have even movie roles, and I have this perfect role for you. And he would start, at least for what I feel was maybe 1.5 hours of grooming. I didn't know that then. I thought he would just like me. And then he showed me this portfolio with some Swedish women that were famous models. And he said, "Do you want to be anything like them? And then if you do, you have to give something back." And then he shoved his hand into my vagina.
Okay, well, let's let you take a pause there. First of all, honor you for the courage to share that. When I read that in the book, I was quite, as a man should be, disgusted. And I want to riff on that part of the story about your career in the modeling industry, and actually tell you about some circumstances that made me think about when
I lost you there, I think. Okay.
Oh, are you am I back?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
you're back.
All right. And I was going to say, before I get into my thoughts that came out of what you said, I want to lighten it up a bit so that we can get into more tougher stuff. There seems to be a Swedish connection here when I read your book. So I want to tell you something uncanny. First of all, when I grew up as a kid in my parents' home, two doors down was a Swedish family, the Nylanders. And I began to escape my home, which was pretty bad, babysitting these two young kids, Johan and Christina. So I grew up from age 9, getting to know the whole culture, the Swedish culture. He drove a Volvo. These kids, they spoke Swedish. I used to take them fishing. And then I'm in Vancouver, Canada. And when I started follow hockey. Most of Canadians are hockey fans. I know in America they have the NHL. And the Sedin twins from Sweden became the picture boys for our hockey team. And so everywhere I'm looking in my lifeline, there's Swedish. And of course, I read in your book the word Abba, and I went, wait a minute, that's in the band. And then I said, your name's Ebba. I'm wondering if that comes. And then I remember, because of my influence from the Nylander family, I went to the first time to see Abba live when I was, I think, 17. And what a tremendous talent. So I wanted to share some of those happy thoughts of my experiences. And the reason why I did that is I was preparing for the show, and what I've learned, and I'm preparing some other work for the screenplay, is that if we, as you taught me in your book, we have the power to change the meaning of a thought. And in a heartbeat, we can learn to be happy or sad. And so just everybody's a teaching moment. After you heard Ebba's horrific story about the way she was treated by these men, and we shifted to some humorous points of my life, just feel the difference in how we felt. And that's why I give you such honor to the courage, because in your book, you've taken the full journey to the other side. And I know every day it's work for you, and I love you and your story, because you are not talking about that, but we fight every day to stay on the other side of that. And for that, thank you for doing this work. So I want to get back into the story. Won't spend too much more time on this chapter, because I think it's a painful. Am I back there? Can you? Okay.
Yes.
An article came out in the Guardian, and an article came out in the Guardian about this Gerard fella, and it appears that many people are coming out. It's almost in a parallel to the Weinstein story. Just talk a bit about that, what that means to your advocacy.
Yeah, so I guess it started a while back now. I was approached by a journalist, and this was through my friend and coworker Carrie Otis, who she was a supermodel, or I would say so. She was, and she has her own book, Beauty Disrupted, and we now work together with this new organization, Victorious Angels. And our mission is really to be a voice out there, like for the new Me Too movement, especially in this industry, because it hasn't happened yet. And there are so many people in this industry that really need to be, I should say, called the truth upon, because there's been so much abuse you cannot imagine. And it's been hidden so long. So it's really about time that everybody comes forth that has part of this and has their own story. And we want to be the spearheaders, or what you say, for these women.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you lost me there a little bit. So yeah.
No, I'm just going to pick it up because I'm loving what you're saying. Look, we disrupted your pathways in your brain by having you talk about a painful chapter. I so get you, and what you're doing, and why I brought up the article. Everybody, if you read the Guardian article, which came out November 20th, it talks about this the person who's allegedly been doing these things, but it talks about all the women who are starting to have the courage to come out and share their story,
Yeah.
and because of the work that you're doing and what I saw in Victorious Angels, I just want to congratulate you, because it's for every one time you tell your story or somebody reads a book, whether they've been raped as you were or treated the way you were, it gives us courage to tell our story.
Yeah. I lost you a little bit again, but yes, I agree, and it's so necessary that we all share our story, because everybody has a story to share. Everybody has a secret to share also, and I think it's not difficult for me to share this story anymore, because I really healed that part of myself.
Yes.
And I found my own growth, and I actually love sharing that story. It's not a problem anymore.
Yeah.
I wish for everybody to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. They say the demons are your gifts, and I want to ask you a question about your parents. So whose love or attention did you crave the most, and what did you have to be to get that attention?
I think, as a daughter, of course, it was my father who disappeared, who was always gone. He was always working. And it took a year. I'm still healing. I think as a woman, you always have to be careful not projecting your own childhood upon men and your own issues. But for sure, I did for a long time. And my mom was always there, but she was not betraying me in that sense, like my father did, because when he left to be with other women, he also betrayed me in that sense. So that was a pattern that I created, that I had to really work through years of therapy and coaching to heal it within myself.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And as I said, there's many people that I meet, even through my own coaching work, that have had abandonment issues, or their fathers have left. And I learned through my development. I wanted to see what you think about this. That I've started studying neuroplasticity and the power of our brain. And what I learned is, in the first 10 or 15 years, children don't have the ability to understand if something's true or false. The prefrontal cortex part of the brain doesn't develop and mature till 20. So if somebody says you're fat, like I was told many times, or you're ugly, or you're not good enough, then you can be a superstar, a model, you can be an actor, and you can be intelligent, but looking in the mirror, you can see fat, stupid. These are thinking traps that are wired in a young age. And what was interesting is, I want to just go there with this story. I was reading your book about when you met Robert, and we'll talk about that, because he sounds like an amazing man. You two have, like my wife Anna and I, probably gone through a journey of some days saying, why are we still together? My wife and I are very competitive. She's Italian and she's beautiful, and we are opposites. But she's married to a guy who's come from this weird background and triggers at the various thing. And she's not emotion based. She's an amazing person. She's strong, and then some used to intimidate me. And I read your book, and there's this one story where you two were you were trading stories about, you called it betrayal or missteps. And again, believe it's that pattern of where we come from. That was our normal, and sometimes we trip up. And I remember reading this one where Rob went on a walk. By the way, he's a PGA or a professional golfer. So again, he stepped into this world. But I read that story where he went for a walk with some woman and he came back and you just lost it. And where were you? And you had all these thoughts. I'm going to give it
Well,
back to you. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think that's part of it, like when you haven't healed all the way, when you haven't healed that sorrow from your childhood, it comes back and it haunts you. And when you're exposed to these situations, you project yourself constantly.
Yes.
And I totally projected myself there for sure. So yeah, so he triggered me a lot, but also that's I think I really attracted him so that I could heal that part of myself. And I don't know if you
Yeah.
know this, we're actually divorced now. so
Okay.
so we moved on
Well,
to something else.
okay. Well, that might be book two. So can I
Yes,
finish the
it
rest
is.
of
Yes,
the
go ahead,
story?
please. Mhm.
And thank you for sharing that. That's one of the things I was going to say to you. But the other part of that story that I was trying to get at, and thank you for blessing it with what you said, is that my wife, when I met her, she was a bank manager. I come from a financial industry, working for some of the biggest banks here, and I worked in the U.S. as well. And she was Italian and grew up with family's everything. She grew up with a completely different lifestyle I did. I was a bit of a loner. I was introverted and shy because my family law was lost when I was a kid and I had to survive. Became the father to my mother. Anyway, that's all in my book. But I remember Anna used to, because she's so beautiful, a lot like you have a presence, and she would go out and she would tell me sometimes when we were dating that she'd go out for a glass of wine with a guy who wanted to hold her hand. And I started getting all this feeling of jealousy, but I didn't know what it was because I'm thinking back then I wasn't married to her. I just got to know her. And I had gone through my own first divorce. And what it was later is, what happened, Ebba, when we got married in the first year, we almost didn't make it because she would come home late for work and smell like alcohol. And I used to put her on the carpet like a child and say, well, no, how many drinks did you have? Well, why are you so late? Like questioning her, like no trust. And she would put me in my place because Anna can do that. And I finally realized, it took me probably 15 years. And then when I wrote my book, I actually did research on why. It's because my brain would see that, her being late, alcohol smell, guy wanting it. My brain said, that's my father. And my father had affairs. So I became insecure and I started, doubting her, even though she was a good person.
Yeah.
So when I read that part of your book, I really learned a lot about the resilience and how we have to, even today, as we've gone through these things, we continue to be triggered. I just wanted to share that part of it with you.
Sure. How powerful, and it's so easy to do. It's like, but when you see it, what a gift it is to really to see how much we do and how much healing we can do. That's the first start, right?
Yeah. So now that we're at that part of your story, everybody, we're just going to back up. You're going to come back to the YouTube premiere and see this incredible interview from the beginning, read the book that we're going to tell you about, because you got to get this story, and listen to the podcast. All this comes together for a reason, because this woman has found a purpose in the world based on a story that was, quite frankly, some wouldn't survive it. And so I started thinking when I was reading the book about your life with your former husband, a PGA golfer. You refer to the shadows, but now you're in somebody's life who's never there. They're away golfing, and you're playing a role as a mom and support. And at times I read comments about, he wasn't there enough for me. I needed support. And the first thing that started getting in my mind, and this is with love, I went, I don't like you all of a sudden. And I mean it in a good way. I'm going like, because I had a coach once, because I was like that in my life. I was complaining all the time about my circumstances, and my coach broke me. And when I was a CEO, I got a coach. They paid for it because I had some relationship issues with people. And she said, Tom, every situation you find yourself in today is a direct result of the choices you made. And then I went, okay, you grew up in a childhood where your dad was always away, and you found a guy who's always away in a career. And I'm going like, what are you pretending not to know? He's not going to be home. He's not going to be there to parent your kids. And then I realized that that's just part of the journey, right? That I want to know what you think, because I found my way into my first relationship, attracted to something that was my rush, that was actually a painful relationship. So we go
Yeah.
and they say that there's peptides or something in the brain that we attract what was our normal when we were younger, and we find our way, and maybe that's not where we belong. I don't know if I'm making any sense or if I'm off track,
Oh,
but just talk to me.
I totally agree with you. And I think, it's what they call the molecules of emotion when we get addicted to a certain set of emotions. And we run that over and over and over until we have had it. And I think when you work on yourself and you meditate, especially, you have to find yourself, and you will find yourself. And then you start seeing the chemicals, the reactions, and you start feeling like, what am I doing? Like, this is not who I am. And I'm actually compromising with everything that I am. And
Yeah.
then when you see the compromise, it's like, I don't want to be this person anymore, compromising with my truth. I want to be who I am meant to be. I want to be the best version of myself. And if I should be the best version of myself, I cannot compromise with my own truth. I have to honor that. So I think it comes, then you start changing out the system. You start making new patterns in your brain, doing new routines, challenging yourself. And some things that I've done all my life is I've been very courageous. I always challenge myself. I always stretch myself, see how far I can go, because I want to live life to the fullest. And I always have, even as a child. I think I was crazy like that. I always,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
bike downtown. I would climb trees, do crazy stuff. But for sure, I think if we don't do that, if we don't seek movement and move forward and allow instead life to come at us, life was going to create chaos and crisis so that we can move out from that situation. Because if we don't move, if we don't have this natural growth of evolvement, then we get stagnant, right? And that's when crisis happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody, that's a teaching moment, because stagnancy and growth, I mean, you nailed it. And we're at the point of the story now where you've discovered something, and there's so much in this book that I want people to read about. Gosh, you did so many things for your own growth and development. I mean, I can count on 2 sheets of paper all the courses and programs and places in the world you went to seek and still, but it's reminded me, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the Wizard of Oz,
Oh,
where
really?
you and I, if we know the story, like, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go to find out the truth about yourself? And I was searching for something through personal development courses, but happiness really is here. It's in me. And it was covered up because somebody put in me things that were not true about who I am. And I believe that every child who's born is golden before the cement builds up. You're beautiful, you're golden, you're talented. You don't have to be a model. You don't have to be what your father was. But I want to say this because I'm passionate about it, that I was taking a cognitive behavior therapy course for my own depression through a slip and fall I had. And Ebba, they taught me that today they're saying parents have to shift the way they parent. I want to know what you think about this.
Oh, I
So
so agree.
if I said to you, I don't like you, versus I don't like what you did, but I like you, you're a good person. I think that's what parents are starting to realize, how they have to parent. Instead of tell your children you love them and they're enough, not making them feel that they're broken.
Yeah, I think like what we're focusing on so much in society is feeling good. Like
Yeah.
we don't look at feeling bad. And I think I love that you said when you read my book, you felt bad, like I don't like you anymore. I'm like, good. Because that's at least says something that what I wrote is triggering something within you. And if I can trigger that, that's good, because then you can look at yourself. And so I think we need to shift the focus on it's okay to feel bad, first of all.
Yes.
You don't
Yeah.
have to struggle. And I see it, I have a 19-year-old now and a 16-year-old, and I could hear all their friends. They often came to our house, like hanged out with us and talking out, often talk with my teenagers. I love them like my own kids. And I think, just listening to them and hearing what they're going through, having a voice, because most parents are so busy surviving. We don't have time to listen. We don't eat dinners together. Like, to me, when we've always had dinners together. I mean, it's harder now when I'm single, obviously, and they're older, but every day we would have a dinner together and talk. But so few families do that because they
Yeah.
can't. They're too
Yeah.
tired. So that's one thing, listening, and then, really understanding what's going on, not projecting our own stuff onto them. And I'm saying that meaning our own our own dreams, our own goals,
Yeah.
trying to live through our children. We need to allow them to have their own lives. And what that means doesn't have to mean that everybody is suited for college.
Yeah.
We have to find out, we have to create a system where we can support what they desire, who they want to be, their own goals. And we cannot do that alone. We have to come together to do that. So I think this is something that I see as a problem, because we're getting so isolated, more and more isolated from each other.
Right.
And if you don't belong to church, if you don't belong to some kind of organization where you have that support system, it's very difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. I guess COVID-19, one of the silver linings is forcing people to maybe be more together, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking about what you said. My background, my parents are Fijian, but I'm South Asian, and in the Indian, I was raised Christian, and that's my faith. But, I think about, this is a culture. By the way, I don't know if you know the name Russell Peters. He's a comedian, and
No.
thing I love about, well, you could do this. You're a model, and you could poke at yourself because you have the right when you're a model. Well, he's a Indian man, and he gets up on stage and he pokes at
I know
himself.
who it is. Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
know.
Well, I remember he was doing a talk recently just from Mumbai, his new thing, and I'll just be quick on this because he's triggered something, and he said something to the effect that he said there's a whole generation of people in India who left India to go to different parts of the world because they said they're taking their kids to that part of the world to give them a better life, and yet they want to keep their kids in a bubble, and they tell their kids what to think and what to do and who to marry. And he said, we're raising a whole generation who don't think for themselves. You have to have a degree, and you have to be this, and you have to be that. And it really resonated with me how that's an old belief system. But I love what you're teaching, and you said that. And now we're going to get into the last part of your story, which is you come through this dark night of the soul, which is in the narrative. I talk about the hero's journey. To all this ups and downs, you've discovered something about yourself. And I remember reading in the book, there was this one moment where this light went on. I can't remember exactly what you were studying, where you started thinking about when you were younger, the things you love to do. And it's almost as if you discovered, I'm not where I belong. I was in the wrong place. And then you took that turn and everything changed for you. Just talk about, how that evolved, that last part.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have those moments several times per year, I thought almost, but a lifetime, right? Where we come to this, where we have to look at ourselves, and I can't remember exactly what you're referring to, but I know it has happened. It still happens. Actually, I think COVID is one of the best things that can happen to us when it comes to that part, because we do have the opportunity to really look into ourselves and reflect and ask ourselves these important questions. Who am I? Am I living my purpose? Am I
Yeah,
living?
I think it was energy dials or something about that part of.
Oh, no, I think, okay. So it could have been, I did have something called the Kundalini Awakening. It could have been that, because
that's what I got. That's it.
and for people who don't know what that is, Kundalini is a Sanskrit word. It means, it's kind of like an energy. It's pictured as a snake that resides at the bottom of your spine. And it's very, very interesting, this whole concept. But what it means is that we have this dormant power within, and our purpose in life is to reawaken to who we truly are. And that part of us is this divine energy that is always constant. So I awoke this energy, and it just happened. I didn't plan it. I thought it only would happen to gurus or holy men. But I worked with somebody who is a body therapy guy. And this happened through that session. And at that moment, I thought I died. It was this lightning bolt that just rose to top of my head. And I thought I died. And in the moment, I found nothingness. There was this greatest void. and I found like my life doesn't matter at all. I, it was pitch black. There was nothingness, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So what's the purpose? And then I heard from my inner voice, it was like, well, you create the purpose. You choose, you create it. Because I think when we come to source, when we come back to where we came from, it's this nothingness. It's this void of, darkness before light. So at the same time as I felt that, I also experienced that I was part of everything. I was the particle in the air. I was the particle in the table. I was existing everywhere, and I was not afraid. That's why I'm not afraid anymore to come out and speak, because I know, there's really nothing to be afraid of, really. At core. Sometimes I'm really can be afraid, but
of course. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I mean, I'm so inspired by you, and the word omnipresent came to life in my brain when you said pieces of you everywhere. And I'll tell you where I went, because now you nailed that. Where that was a part of the book I was trying to explain. So sorry I got off, didn't say it right. But where did I go when I read that? Here's where I went. I saw that as your turning point, but I went back to a point where, here's my backstory. It was, I was on an airplane traveling for 6-7 years as a executive, and I orphaned my daughter. And when she's 22 and she's the other side of the country at university, I love her, and don't have kids at home anymore. And I remember she sat on my lap when she was leaving, and we weren't that close because some of the things I brought into her life as a anxious, man of a father who was a wild man, probably was not the best parenting. But anyway, I said something to her. I said, I'm going to miss you. And she said, well, you weren't there anyway. And it was like, the stab in the heart that I was waiting for, where I could actually then redeem myself. And I said, I know. And it took me another year, but she came home one year, last year. And I sat with her. I said, I want to talk to you. And I said, I just want to tell you this. I said, remember that movie with Steve Jobs about Apple? I don't know if you ever saw it, but Steve Jobs was fired from Apple because he couldn't get along with people. And his true story was he was abandoned by his parents. He was adopted and then given away. And he was angry. And he treated his daughter poorly. So they're on top of a rooftop, and he was looking across at her in his usual black t-shirt and jeans and those spectacles. And his daughter said, Dad, why did you do that? Why did you treat Mom that way? Why didn't you even fund my education? And he looked at her and he says, because I was, what did he say? I wasn't, I was born, no, sorry, I lost. He said, I was born flawed or something like that. In other words, he acknowledged for the first time, versus being arrogant, that his own flaws got in his way. So I said that to my daughter. I said, remember that scene? I said, I want to tell you now, I love you, and you were always enough. And I don't think I ever told you that, but I wanted you to be, because you saw Dad being a CEO and this and that. I want you to know that no matter what you do, whether you get a degree or you get married, whoever it is, you're enough of all, and as long as you're happy. And it took me my whole life to be able to get to that point. And that was my whatever that word was. Sorry, that was that was my moment, and that's really where my life changed. And that was years ago. So you bring out so much in talking in that book that it's really hearing. And I hope that everybody who sees this interview takes each moment that you've taught us something and does something good for them. And the last thing I want to say to honor your work with the modeling industry is that I believe that your work is heroic, that you're making a difference there. And there's a reckoning in that industry. To me, it's an industry. I'm not a model, but you can tell us where women go and they put the highest level of trust is needed. They're giving themselves, their identities, their bodies. And for those predators to be out there, we need to clean the swamp, or whatever, your president says. We need to, probably bad example, but we need to get rid of that. And your work is going to help. I can see that. So I want to now honor you with 4 words. These are leadership words, Ebba. I write these down, and you see my head turning here. The audience will listen to this and can't see that. But as you're speaking, I'm writing things down here. And there's 4 of them. The first one is love. You are love. It comes from you. I feel it. There's something about you. There's this presence. And knowing where you come from, that's tremendous, because it's hard work. Number 2 is your trailblazing. So you're tough and you're strong, but you're using that story and you're using it to create advocacy for the industry of modeling or women who, are unsafe. Thank you for that. And number 3 is you've got a worldview. And I believe that leaders in business with worldview, you speak through Monaco and through France and through different industries and everything you've done. Gosh, the average person can't have that knowledge. And number 4, I say hero, but you're a heroine for coming through that journey and taking what you're doing now to power the world forward. Don't ever stop. And so tell us now where we can get a hold of that amazing book. I don't know if you have it there to hold up, but the book.
First, thank you. Thank you for your amazing words. And
You're
thank
welcome.
you so much. It means a lot, though. Thank you. Yes, for anybody who wants to buy the book, of course, you can go to any, well, nowadays it's online, right? But bookstore, they have it, like Amazon or Barnes & Nobles. Yeah. But I do also have a PDF version of it that people can download for free on my website. And it's www.truestarcoaching.com. And people can follow me there too and see what I'm doing. I write blogs monthly, so if anybody's interested. Also have a lot of media from what's been going on the last year regarding Victorious Angels. And of course, like anybody who wants to get to know more about Victorious Angels and Carrie and Jill and Claire, who's working on this case in Paris, they can go to www.victoriousangels.com.
Well, thank you, everybody. That's awesome. Thank you, everybody. Get the book. And by the way, I'm going to write a 5-star review for you, post it on Amazon and Goodreads.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. And for those listening, new authors or authors are writing books, they're unknown. I mean, we're talking to somebody who has a personality that's known, but reviews help, and they help an author get known. They tell the sales reps of the bookstores that there's something special here, so let's carry this book. And the website is awesome. The part about the stuff that's going on with that trial, it's interesting too. So definitely check that out if you want to stay in touch with that. Your website is pretty cool. There's a newsletter option to subscribe, and I'm going to do that myself.
I can give you a little bit of news if you want. We're actually working on a documentary that's gonna support survivors. So very excited about that. But I can't tell you more right now.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, we'll stay in touch, and I'm sure we'll be able to carry any news for you. And as we wrap up, you probably didn't know this unless Heather told you, but we're going to induct you with an award today into what we call the Quiet Warrior Tribe. And so this is meaningful. I want to just tell you quickly as we wrap up. You see behind me, there's a screensaver. There's sort of looks like a guy who looks a lot like somebody I know. These are challenge coins, and the challenge coins started in World War I, and they were carried by soldiers to commit to each other a purpose. If you showed up and you didn't have it, maybe you bought drinks or dinner. And today they're used around the world to create community for something that has purpose. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, where my dad was for 22 years, used them. First responders, teachers, FBI. And so I created this as for my show. The front of the coin they're hand painted and crafted in the US. The front is the image of the show. The back is actually the narrative for the hero's journey. And it comes in a cherry box. And by receiving it, you commit to never stopping that amazing story and doing the work you're doing to make a difference to help those people you serve. So welcome to the Quiet Warrior Tribe.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. Beautiful. Very honored.
You're welcome. And hopefully I'll one day be able to stand with you and hand it to you and take a photo, but more on that later. So everybody, let's find this show when it comes out and give it a high rating to honor Ebba P. Karlsson's amazing work. Get that book she talks about, read it, give it a review, and find that purpose like she did. Live with passion like you can see does, and live the life that you deserve and desire just like Ebba. Thanks, everybody. And Ebba, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care, guys.
All right, stand by. We're just going to end the broadcast. You'll be staying on. All right, end the broadcast.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca